preparing to live stream the webinar.
We're now live on YouTube.
What was that, sorry?
We're now live on YouTube.
Preparing to live stream the webinar. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone. Just welcome as you join us this morning. We'll just give it a couple of minutes as people are coming into the chat room. Welcome to the Virtual Expo Bristol Housing Festival 2020. It's great to have you all along. We'll just let people, it just takes a little bit of time. We're already streaming live on YouTube, so if you're joining us on YouTube, it's great to see you this morning. And we'll just let a few more people join the room this morning. Thanks for making time. We're looking forward to the next couple of weeks as we've got, if you've not had a chance yet to look at the website, you'll see that we've completely refaced it for the next 2-3 weeks. So please do take a look at that. You'll see there's new features on there. There's obviously a real focus on activity that's coming up. So do take a look at that. Jessie, I'll hand over to you and we will make an official start to the Expo, I believe.
Wonderful. Well, this is the official start of the 2020 Bristol Housing Festival exhibition, and we are kicking off this year with a virtual expo. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a rundown of what you can expect. So the expo this year is 3 weeks long. We're starting today, whoop, whoop, and ending at the end of those 3 weeks. And we want to just also say thank you so much to our headline sponsors, Bookbook UK and SWPA, because them and so many other partners and sponsors have made this expo this year possible and has made it able to happen. But there are various different events of this exhibition, of this expo, that I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to. So as Jez said, we've redesigned the website just to kind of make it a brand new thing for the expo, because obviously we can't get everyone together in person and bring you all down to a big event in Bristol. We've made it a virtual meeting space. So do log into our website and have a little look. There are various things going on. So of course there are the webinars, and you found the first one, which is great. So welcome, thank you so much for coming. But there are also going to be a whole load of videos that we've done a series of interviews in conversation with, we've called it, and it's a whole series of interviews that are going to be live streamed on YouTube over the course of the 3 weeks. So we've tried to keep it all very simple. So each of the interviews will go out at 12:45 each day, and you'll be able to find a list of those on YouTube as well. So you can live watch those interviews all together, and the comments box will be live as well, so we can have conversation as we go through those interviews. But there are some brilliant people that have been interviewed that we've been able to spend some time with and ask some questions, so it's definitely worth a watch. One of the other elements of the expo this year is something called Community Voices. So we've been looking at the stories and of communities that make up Bristol, and actually looking at how community builds and grows together. And a whole host of different people from across Bristol have given us kind of short videos of themselves talking about their community, talking about what makes community special to them. So there's a whole section on the website there, and actually there's still time to upload a video. So if you think you've got an exciting story of community and how community is formed in your area of Bristol, we'd really love to hear. Or if you know of a particular area of Bristol that's got an interesting story to tell, do send the link on to someone. We'd love to get some more videos and start to represent lots of different areas of Bristol, because we know there are so many different pockets of communities across the city, and we'd like to get as broad a feel of that as possible. But we'll need help to do that, because we won't be able to reach everybody. So there's that, and then alongside that, there's also one of our team has done some incredible research, pulling together a whole host of research that's already been done using working with Festival of Ideas and Know Your Place as well, among lots of other things, looking at the history of social and affordable housing in Bristol. So what we've done is created a section on the website that kind of collates some of that information, not all of it by any stretch, but just pulls out some highlights of some of the most amazing things that have been going on for years in Bristol and the west of England. it's been really interesting actually for us as we've been looking back over this research and the kind of history of Bristol, to note that Bristol has been leading and innovating and been creating new ideas to big problems for decades and decades. This is what we're talking about, innovation and creativity in solution finding at the moment, but it's really not new to Bristol. It's been happening for years and years. There are also, alongside the webinars and all those bits that I've just mentioned, 3 particular networking events. So we're setting up virtual networking events, and we would love to see as many people as possible as part of that on Wednesday and Friday this week, so the 14th and the 16th, the first 2, and then the last one is on Tuesday next week. So if you're not signed up to that, the details are on our website. And of course, we then have a lineup of webinars over the course of this 3 weeks, and it's only right that I take a moment to thank so many of the people, the speakers, the chairs that are going to be involved in these webinars. We've got an incredible lineup of people and thoughts and ideas to be shared, and I'm really, really, really looking forward to all of this. So the only last thing to say is that we do have a LinkedIn group that's going to be a kind of forum for conversation and discussion as we go through the expo. So if you are not on that already, you should be able to find us on LinkedIn, called the Virtual Expo 2020, and you just request an invite and we'll let you in, and you can be part of the conversation as we go through these 3 weeks. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just for those of you that maybe haven't really engaged with the festival to date, or aren't really quite aware of what the sort of thrust of our approach is, let me just maybe just give a quick reminder of really the context in which we find ourselves, and therefore what we hope the Housing Festival can help participate in as an enabler. We're very interested in the challenge that we face as a city, and actually, of course, as a nation, around the challenge of housing. Putting that into the context of the One City Plan, 2050, that everybody would have a secure home and a community in which they can contribute and thrive. And we're aware of the challenge that the affordable housing challenges that we face, the climate challenges that we face, and of course now this coming challenge around the construction skills crisis that we face in the UK. And into that, we believe, and we hope that modern methods of construction can be part of that solution, because it's a different way of thinking and a different way of building homes. But we also really want to look at however we build homes, whatever methodology is used, that we're focusing on people, we're focusing on thriving communities, we're focusing on the wisdom of how we do that well. And into that space, the Bristol Housing Festival is ideally this umbrella. So while there will be projects that we are involved in, and we'll update you on some of those, we also really want to celebrate where there is good news in housing. We recognise that there are scenarios and situations and events in housing that are quite tricky and difficult and will not be universally approved of. But we also think that there are opportunities and stories and projects that just celebrate good news and demonstrate really good thinking. And so how can we come together as a people, as a place, and the politics of place, and shine a light on those and celebrate the good work of what is happening. And all too often, I'm afraid, that we see that, understandably, that the things that get attention are those where there are division and there is distrust, but we want to sort of have a platform where we can come together in a different context. And within that, there's lots of other partners in the city. So we're looking at our social housing partners, looking at Gorham Homes, which is a partner of the City Council, to look at how we can deliver more affordable, looking at how MMC can be part of maybe tackling some of the carbon challenges that we face in our housing, etc. So there's going to be lots of opportunities. And if you're aware of projects in the city particularly, but also elsewhere that we can drive inspiration from and share, then please do let us know, because we want those to be celebrated and encouraged. And the sense of that is, how can we start to build hope into housing? How can we look at models that are successful and learn how we can follow and replicate those? So that's the kind of culture, a celebration of what is good in housing, a celebration of where there is opportunity to do things differently, and an opportunity to really tackle and look at some of the problems that we face, but always in the context of what can we do differently to create new solutions and find the solutions that we need. So if you can contribute to that, we want that to be the story, that it's not a sort of a Bristol Housing Festival approach per se. It's actually, how can we gather in the wisdom of that and share it and learn from it and build it more into the city and wider. Jessie.
Absolutely. And I didn't say at the beginning, but you do have a question and answer box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we'll happily take questions as we go, or you can save them all to the end, but do send us some questions and we can answer those as we go. So we also wanted to give you a bit of a kind of update on some of the specific projects that we've been involved in some way, shape or form. So I'm just going to run through a couple and then hand over to Jez, who'll do a couple of others as well. So I want to start with Launchpad. So Launchpad this week celebrates their year anniversary of the official opening. So congratulations to Launchpad and all the team that were involved in pulling that together and getting that open. We've got an event, one of the webinars coming up later this week, in fact, on Thursday, is a combination of many of the different people that were on the project team that made that happen, and just having a conversation with them about how did you pull it off? How did you do it? What were the challenges and the barriers? What were the kind of notable and noteworthy moments within pulling off that project? And that coincides with the launching of one of our reports, lessons learned on Launchpad. So one of the things that we want to do as the Bristol Housing Festival as we go forward with all the different projects that we get involved in is to try and capture some of the learning and the kind of the institutional knowledge that needs to be taken on board and shared around to make some of these innovative projects more mainstream. How do we share the learning of how those projects happened and what were the solutions to the barriers that were overcome in order to make those scalable and replicable? So lessons learned report for Launchpad was the first report that we've managed to pull together and publish. So do check that out. It is also on the website. ZPods, which is the Hope Rise scheme on Chalks Road in Bristol. We've been doing a lot of social posting about this. We're really excited about this one because it is very, very near to completion. We are due to see that absolutely completed by the end of this month. And we are so excited to actually be able to see people moving into those. ZPods has been a collaboration between ZPods, the company, between Bristol City Council, between us, the YMCA, and there have been so many other people that have been involved along the journey. And this is just such an exciting moment in time to be able to say, actually, this is complete. It can now be opened and people can move in. So we're really, really looking forward to that. Again, we've got another webinar all about that ZPods lessons learned coming up next week. So do check that out. And we will shortly be publishing the lessons learned report for ZPods for its kind of inception through to build phase. And then we will look to do a kind of year in review after it's been open for a year as well. So watch out for those. There have been so many other parts to the ZPod story as well that have been really interesting. So we'll be doing some working with University of the West of England and the Centre for Thriving Places, funded by Commonweal. We're doing some post-occupancy evaluation, looking at how do these homes perform? Do they meet the standards that they say they're going to meet? Are they going to behave in the kind of energy efficient way that they say they're going to? But also, do they work as places for people? Does the community element, the community builders, do these young people that are living in these homes, are they actually getting the hoped for community and support that was the intention behind the project? So part of the work is doing the evaluation to make sure that these projects, the big ideas, are actually happening, and we're being able to see through everything within that. Alongside that, do also watch out, because the end of the ZPods, it's kind of a row of houses if you haven't seen any of the images. And on the end, we've managed to work with a local artist, with Upfest as well. They have helped us find a local artist, a guy called Nick Harvey, who's done a load of community consultation as well. And he's going to be painting a mural on that far end for Hope Rise. And we've seen some of the early images and they look amazing. So obviously can't say anything about those yet. They will be appearing over the next little while, but do have a look. Hopefully we're going to have some time-lapse footage of that mural being installed, so we'll be able to release that in due course. But there are so many other projects going on across the city, ones that we have been directly involved with and not. For example, the Norwest Media Centre, I was able to go down and see Melissa Mean there recently. And during lockdown, they worked with automated architecture to explore digital fabrication technologies in community settings. So local people from the community were able to design and then build, even socially distanced, a pavilion that's going to be used as shared community space for the next little while. And I got to go and visit this completed structure, which sits outside of the Norwest Media Centre building, and it's stunning, absolutely beautiful, and well worth going to visit, or at least a drive past it. It's really, really beautiful, well worth having a look. Jez.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. So the ZPods project is also one of the projects that features under the Innovate UK project, enabling housing innovation for inclusive growth. That is a consortium of, I think, 14 partners in total that is being delivered as the lead partner with YTKO, and in partnership with the Bristol City Council, ourselves and BRE, and then a host of other modular partners and builders. And I just wanted to mention that because, again, there is a webinar that we're going to be hosting with all of those, some of those key partners tomorrow morning. So you'd be really welcome to hear that. But that project is important because under that we then have some of the other projects that we're engaged with and partnering with, and I'll talk about those. But the Innovate UK project has 3 streams, and I think it is important to recognise that we see how modern methods need to sit within this wider ecosystem of how we deliver housing in the UK. And so those 3 streams are hopefully we're going to be delivering 9 housing projects in Bristol, which will be a significant different sort of set of typologies. So looking at full panelized volumetric, SMEs, community groups, etc. So really looking at that broader ecosystem of housing. And we hope that will deliver about 420 homes. It's about £17 million worth of capital investment into Bristol. And on top of that, of course, we hope that the plan is that about 55 to 60% of those homes will be affordable houses actually owned and retained by Bristol City Council for the needs of Bristol. So that's the kind of context of the bid. But on top of that, there are 2 additional really important streams. One of those is what we call the council change model. And this is looking at partnering with the council to say, well, how can a council really understand how to enable and support modern methods of construction, and indeed should it? And on what basis should it? How do you interrogate the market? How do you understand the market? How do you engage with that early design freeze, which means some of your governance and your decision making will be different? And how can you have confidence in the methodologies and the delivery that you're working with? And the third part of the project is what we're calling an optioneering tool, or is now going to be called constructing modern methods, which is a digital toolkit. And the idea is to build a way to help that decision making so that we can have a database looking at the performance and the delivery, and particularly around sort of some of the social value elements, and of course the sustainability elements, so we can really understand what the market can offer, how the market is evolving, and give confidence to partners to really engage in that marketplace, which is a complex marketplace. So that's the Innovate UK bit. If you're interested to hear a bit more about that and where it's developing, please do join us tomorrow at 10:30. But 2 of the other projects that are quite advanced on that, and you may have already again seen something about, one is the scheme with Booklook, and we're really excited about this scheme as it comes forward. This is a scheme for the joint venture between Skanska and IKEA using their volumetric system. This actually secured planning consent a little while ago. And I think it's important to say that, one of the things that drives us for this scheme is, again, that this should be 173 homes, of which about 46% will be affordable. So there is this real desire to create these mixed communities. And so if you're interested in that, there's more information on our website about that. But we also, working with Booklook and working with the council and supporting that project, and the HRA, and it looks as if we're moving towards that sort of getting onto site in November, which would be great news to actually see some of the ground preparation start on that scheme. And the other one, just to mention, I think, is the scheme with LNG Modular, on Bonington Walk, which is in Lockleys. And the ambition for this scheme is that it will be 188 homes, 51% of which would be affordable. And of course, not only affordable, but looking at how you deploy a local lettings policy to ensure that some of these houses are for the local population. It's really engaging, supporting that local population. And this has been in for planning application, and we are waiting for a committee date for that to be allocated. And I'm aware that this scheme in particular has caused some real concern, and understandable concern from local people in the community around the ecology, because although this has been a site that's been allocated in the local plan for a long time for housing, of course that space has grown and trees have grown up on it and the ecology has changed, and et cetera, et cetera. So in the context of that, and it's fascinating timing that the city has produced its ecological blueprint, and if you've not seen that, it's really worth a look about how can you tackle this ecological challenge and emergency as well, ensuring we're building responsibly, but also how do we tackle the housing needs of the city. And I think that it's very easy to be impacted by headlines, but one of the things that really has impressed me is this partnership with the council and with L&G Modular and the architects and the advisors as move forward, is it looks as if on paper that we can deliver those homes and a 4.5% improvement in net biodiversity. Now, that is not my area of expertise, but I think there's a story there about how can we use that ecological blueprint really to understand how we do need to obviously deliver the housing that we need as a city, particularly those affordable homes, but we have to do it in a way that's responsible. So that's a very live conversation, and I'm aware of the sensitivities and the different pressures and the different thoughts about that, but I still do, and I'm confident that there's an evolving story there where we can learn about the wisdom of delivering those kind of schemes and actually deliver a scheme that is really responsible in that ecological space, as well as the quality of those homes. So there will be more news on Boddington Walk, I suspect, in the next several weeks, so please do keep an eye on that. But again, we'll have a chance to talk about some of those projects in this webinar tomorrow. If you want to see other projects that are involved as well, on our website there's a whole list of projects, so please do have a look at those. Now, if you'd indulge us for a little bit before we get into sort of other updates, what we normally do with our quarterly updates, obviously this is a bit different because it's for the start of our expo, is we invite people that would want to come just to hear an update from us about projects. We normally do this in person. Ideally, we'll do it over a coffee and something to eat. But obviously, because of COVID-19, we're having to revert to a virtual webinar this morning. But one of the things we wanted to do was, I suppose, just humanly, just share a bit of the story about the festival. And I was reflecting with Jessie on some of our highs and lows, because we're effectively 2 years old today, publicly. In reality, for us, it's been a 3-year journey. But it's been a real journey, as many of these things, are ups and downs. So in the spirit of vulnerability and transparency, and just a chance to take the moment to celebrate and reflect, we thought it'd be quite fun to share with you some of kind of the history of where the idea of the festival came from, and what our hopes are for the future. Perhaps some of you may have been able to join us for the very first launch event, the very first expo that we hosted down the waterfront in 2018, where we were able to erect 6 modular homes and a series of marquees, and for 2 weeks we inhabited that space, and it was a real joy. And I think that we were blessed with great weather, and 6,500 people came in it, and it kind of launched the atmosphere and it launched the vision. It was very much around the values of the festival, around generosity, being united, being courageous, and something about being hopeful, and that was very much our kind of inception. But behind the scenes, there was a different story in some regards, and I thought it'd be just fun to share a little bit about that with you, because the Housing Festival as an idea had been talked about between myself, working with Lord Way, talking to the administration in Bristol, talking to pretty much anyone in the city who was interested in hearing about the idea. And I think it's fair to say that lots of people thought it was a good idea, but it was one of those good ideas, but is it actually ever going to happen? And certainly there was no money, there was no real delivery plan. It was a broad concept, and as I think a lot of you will know, ideas are great, but they're relatively cheap because you can sit in a pub and talk about them, but delivering them is where sort of the rubber hits the road. And I still recall there was a significant meeting where we were in August 2018 at the end, and Bristol was due to host the Global Parliament of Mayors in October, and an email came through from Bristol City Council and the Mayor's office to say there have been further meetings, and the decision is that we would like to go for it to coincide with the Global Parliament of Mayors, which was wonderful. I was like, lift off, we've got it. We've been talking about this for a long time. talking about it for a year. We've kind of sketched out some rough ideas, and finally we kind of had a green light with the support of the administration to use that space, which obviously was critical to host an event. And I'll be honest, we went very quickly from a moment of elation to a moment of absolute panic, because that was 7 weeks away. And the truth is that we had talked to people about an idea, but we had not got very far with sketching out what it actually would look like to deliver the expo. And the more we got into this within the first couple of weeks, the more we realized how terrifying it was in terms of what actually needed to be achieved. We had no funding. We had no partners to deliver any homes. We had no actual consent to use the site in terms of the formality. And then we realized, of course, that if you're going to bring in cranes and pop-up homes, you're dealing with CDM regulations and various consents and licenses. And the list just got worse and worse, let alone the fact that we need to start to advertise something to the public in terms of letting people know that it was coming. And I remember, to the credit of some of the people that engaged with us, speak to them on the phone, they would say, well, this is great, where's your website so I can see what you're doing? And of course it was, oh yeah, we don't have a website. And so there was this horrific kind of 7 weeks. I mean, my background is I'd worked as a corporate lawyer. I've done quite a few completion deals and all-nighters. This felt like a 7-week all-nighter. But we got there. And what I really wanted to just reflect on was that huge credit to the partners like Totally Modular and ZPods and ISO Spaces and others that just said, okay, do you know what, we'll come along, we'll partner with this, because it was a huge step of faith, and it was a huge step into the unknown. And of course, because then we started to bring some of the modular partners that were going to bring their homes, that created the opportunity to then look again at, okay, well, who are the other partners in the city that we can showcase with, who are telling this good news story of housing? And it started to snowball from there. And then again, great thanks to the sponsors who, again, in great faith, stepped in and said, well, okay, we will help fund some of this, because at that point we still had absolutely no budget. And the event did end up costing, because of course, all the security arrangements, the fencing, the licenses, the craneage and the rest of it. I think the whole event cost over £100,000, which was, again, a huge learning curve for us. The reason I'm sharing that with you is that I think there was something about converting a good idea into something that we had to deliver, and recognizing that if this was going to be a city project, yes, it needed someone to catalyze it, but it had to be co-owned and co-designed with our partners, and really just wanted to thank them for doing that. So some of you may know that I'm a man of Christian faith, and I've never prayed so hard in those 7 weeks. Certainly for me, that was a really difficult and stressful time, if I'm honest. But the results were this opportunity to establish momentum, to establish an appetite for innovation, and also as a result of that, always around the human story. And I think one of the things that I've loved is the more we've engaged across the housing sector in the city, the more that we're realizing that there is a problem with our system. You know, I have not met anyone yet who works in housing who goes to work to create systemic poverty. People are working tirelessly and hard to try and create solutions to the problems we face. But the reality is we have a system that is really difficult. And so into that space, this collaboration, this partnership is what I think we're seeing coming out of that, and these good news stories. So Jessie will reflect too. It was a tough 7 weeks, but we're delighted we did it, and we're off and running and excited about some of the projects coming forward.
It definitely was a tough 7 weeks to kind of kick everything off. But I think one of the biggest fears that we would talk about was the fact that what if this is just a talking shop? What if we just sit there and we talk about big ideas but nothing gets delivered? Because we neither of us got into this to run events. You know, we've both done event management in the past, but neither of us, that wasn't what we wanted to do. The event was there and started in order to facilitate wider conversation and to start to think about how do you break down some of the silos between public, between business, between industry, between politicians, between the media, all these different silos. When it comes to housing, you get lots of different silos of conversation and communication. And sometimes the conversation can be quite negative or quite binary or quite black and white. Not always, but it's definitely been our experience in some cases. And part of the reason for the events, part of the reason we do these expos is to keep the dialogue open and try and create a space where we can host conversations which look at the nuances and all the differences and all the multicolours that are part of the conversation around housing. So it definitely was a fear that actually, as we were going through creating this event, that we'd get to the end of the first ever expo and actually it would just have been an event with a few thousand people that came through and nothing would really come of it. But actually, as Jez said, highlighting all those different sponsors, partners, people, members of the public, community groups that engaged and got involved, this has proved to be something that we now have stories to celebrate across the city of things that's going on and is part of a broader and wider conversation. And actually, even pulling this expo together, pulling this virtual version of an expo together, it's been really amazing to look at the stories that are across the city of so many people doing so many things back through history, but also in present day, looking at how people have fought for individuals that have maybe been marginalised, fought for community cohesion and inclusive growth, which is, you know, a buzz phrase that gets used a lot at the moment, but people have been fighting for that in Bristol for a really long time. And actually, particularly this virtual expo, it's been a real chance to look backwards as well as look at the present day and start to think about going forward of what has been achieved. And it's really highlighted for me that across the west of England, across Bristol, as I said before, Bristol has proved to be a real leader of innovation throughout history. And yeah, we're really excited to be able to showcase that this year or begin to showcase that this year. We haven't even really scratched the surface, but it's just a nod towards everything that's been going on. Jez, do you want to share a little bit about kind of looking forward, your hopes for the future?
Yeah, I think just to say this really, you know, we're 2 years in. We talk about hosting an event for 5 years, and obviously, you know, the thing that really drives us, I think personally, is the thought of being able to be in a place where people are being moved into secure homes, and particularly where we see that market failure around just not enough affordable housing being supplied and delivered in Bristol. And how might MMC be part of that solution to create slightly different collaborations and slightly different market capitalizations of how housing is delivered and access to land. So I think the hope for me is that we can, as some of these projects come forward, they're not one-offs, because the idea with the Innovate UK bid is by using those 9 different housing systems, you're not just looking at them as individual piecemeal parts of the problem. You're looking at what are the systemic changes that need to happen to allow local authorities to have a better opportunity of delivering the housing that the city needs, not just the housing that sort of capital-led model tends to want to deliver, understandably, because that's the model that it's funded by and needs to support. So for me, the hope for the future is that one of the things is, yes, seeing more affordable housing delivered, seeing individuals and families and older people moving into better quality, more sustainable homes, but critically that within that we're really understanding how to create sustainable and replicable models that can be scaled up and delivered, not just in Bristol but actually in other parts of the country.
Absolutely. And I think for me there's an element of the kind of the holistic nature of everything that the Housing Festival is doing. So yes, it's all about innovation in construction and innovation in housing, and yes, that's really important, and we are the Bristol Housing Festival. But for me, the thing that kind of is driving me a lot more is around what's the purpose of the innovation, particularly with housing. So how do we use housing to address those wider issues, maybe the wider objectives of the city, the wider social problems that we're facing or challenges that we're facing? How do we use housing as a lever, essentially, to help build resilient, healthy and inclusive communities? There's a stat that the BRA put out a few years ago now that says that £1.4 billion is being spent by the NHS every year, and that 1.4 billion pounds specifically can be attributed to poor housing. So what, you know, in the context of that, as just one of many hundreds of statistics talking about some of the complexities of housings that our society faces, in the context of a climate and ecological emergency, in the context of a shortage of jobs and a shortage of skilled labourers in the construction industry, in the context of housing crisis, looking at the affordability of housing, looking at the availability of housing, looking even at the suitability of some housing, and also in the context of now looking at a country which faces a need to think about its recovery, its economic recovery, as well as its physical recovery. How do we use housing as a lever to address those things? Can we build homes? Can we build communities in a way that actually looks to the future and looks to solving those wider things, rather than just thinking, right, we just need units out on the ground, actually we just need people in houses? But how do we set ourselves up so that as we look forward into the future in 10, 20, even 30, 40, 50 years time, how are we addressing those other issues using the thing that we have in our hands, which is building housing? Is it worth saying as well that we have plans for our expo to extend this conversation and drive this conversation? So as we look forward, plans for the 2021 expo to look at bringing together again another physical exhibition. Obviously, this is all slightly up in the air. We're all slightly watching the kind of progressions of COVID, but the hope and the aim will be to do another physical expo in 2021 so that we can actually host some of these conversations and have more broader conversations in person once again next year. So do watch this space for that. There's been a question come in from Lindy Morgan, who said, given what you said about the launch of the expo, and now the success of the Bristol Housing Festival, would you do anything differently? And if so, what would that be? Jez, would you do anything differently?
So much. I think one of the wonderful things about doing something for the first time is that there's a huge amount of naivety, and there's a huge sense of the opportunity, but with not a real comprehension of all the complexity you're tackling into. But I think, but the truth is, I don't think we would have started the journey if we'd known what we now know. So although there's lots of things I would have done differently, and I think we're building that understanding into then future events and future projects. The reality is that hindsight is always a gift, but sometimes that we didn't have it then. I think what is evident is this critical thing of co-design, and so the ability to bring the right stakeholders around the table and the right representations. Because it's so important that obviously when we're engaging in housing, we're looking both at the existing community that live in a place, you're looking at the new community, the people that have a vested interest in having homes in the city, as well as the ecology and all. Housing is complex and nuanced. And I think what I have learned and I'm loving learning is just how difficult this is. And so one of the key issues is how can we build trust? How can we build trust between the politicians and the developers and the communities? Because where there isn't trust, it becomes quite a binary and divisive conversation. And of course, that stalls good things happening because it gets very difficult. So yes, there's lots that we definitely do differently. And I think we're learning as we go.
I was going to say, I do think that's the point. The whole, it's about learning as we go. So yes, we can look back, as you say, Jez, at hindsight. I mean, it's a brilliant thing, but I think the whole point is around setting up the housing festival and everything we do in a way that learns as we go, that grows from the learning, the evaluation, the research, the reflections, and the hindsight. So I think even if we'd set up differently, it would still have to have and maintain that position of we want to learn as we go, because that's the point of it.
What I'd like to do now, just for sort of 5 minutes, if I may, is just share a couple of reflections about some of the policy and I suppose planning context and funding context that we see. I think particularly in the light of COVID-19 and how and why might that affect the delivery of both affordable homes coming forward and the opportunity for modern methods of construction. There is actually an event again this afternoon in partnership with One City looking at how construction can be used as part of the sort of post-COVID-19 recovery. That's at 2:30, I believe, from memory, or 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. So do join us for that if you can. We've got a great panel of real experts speaking into that space. But what I wanted to do is just reflect on a few headlines. So I think one of those headlines is around cost pressure and the need for market diversification. So cost pressure, one of the problems with modern methods of construction at the moment is that it is more expensive. And that's partly because, of course, what we're trying to do is I believe, as a sector, not just replicate what the traditional build is doing, but actually look at how you price in a more sustainable, better quality product. So a bit like the car showroom, you can buy cars at different prices. How do we create a market that can actually justify buying a more expensive, more quality, more sustainable product with less snagging and less issues on site. So there's an issue around cost pressure. But what we're seeing, a recent RICS report has showed that there's been a further increase between 1% and 4% in traditional construction costs. Post-Brexit, I think we're going to see real pressure on that supply chain and further inflation of those costs. And of course, the supply of those trades. So we're seeing an aging population. And so as some of those people start to retire, et cetera, there's going to be a real pressure, I believe. But now that isn't anything to celebrate, because we need traditional build moving, I believe, at a good pace as well. But it does mean, I think, that some of the cost distinction between traditional MMC may start to even up. And certainly as MMC moves into a sort of slightly more scalable solution. But on top of that, we have a government committed, at the moment, national government committed to diversifying the supply chain of UK housing. Last year, the top 10 house builders, including Persimmon, produced nearly 90,000 homes, which is nearly 2/5 of the total number. But interestingly, since 1980s, the last major recession, we lost 40% of our SME market to of house builders. So we've seen a massive consolidation in that part of the way that we deliver UK homes. Robert Jenrick, Secretary of State, recently came out and said, I don't think we will have succeeded with our reforms if we are sat here in 10 or 20 years' time and the market is as concentrated as it is today. So there's a policy context and a drive to see a diversification in the way that we have a market that can deliver more homes in the UK. And I think that's important to recognise. And into that, you have this conversation around planning and some of the white paper that's coming out. And there's obviously different views about what that will or will not achieve. But of course, one of the drivers behind that planning context is how can we improve the numbers of homes coming forward. And there's a massive debate there around density and quality versus supply. Peter Billy, who's the editor of Housing Week, and Housing Today, said this: forcing councils to zone land for 300,000 new homes will do nothing to solve Britain's housing crisis. Suggesting the state can control housing numbers by boosting the number of available acres is moonshine, as house builders largely control the supply valve. They twist the wheel open or shut with an eye to the economy. It's sophistry to say changing the planning system will magic up homes. Output is yoked to the economic cycle, not to the number of acres zoned by councils. Now, that there's a whole debate in there that is interesting, but we don't have time for that today. But what I did want to say is there's an interesting tangential opportunity there with modern methods, because in principle, if this is about control of land and this is about aggregation of land, and you know that with a difficult market post COVID, what might it be like where you've got partnerships between modern methods of construction and local authorities? If that could happen, to really drive that affordable housing that isn't relying on that supply chain being open or closed, depending on the return that those traditional house builders lead. So is there a different supply chain of housing that effectively can be driven as manufacturing housing wants to be by delivery on site, not just around that sort of planning uplift and capital return? So that planning context is, and market diversification, I think, is a real interesting challenge. The other thing is grant support. So the government recently announced its affordable housing grant. 7.39 billion is being allocated to affordable housing. So this is outside of London. That's 130,000 homes over the next 3 to 4 years for affordable homes. And Homes England has very, very clearly come out and said that they want 1/4 of those to be modern methods of construction. So you can start to see the cost pressures, the supply chain pressures, the market diversification, and then, of course, this grant, which I think will start to create some opportunity for seeing more modern methods of construction. And then, of course, the challenge is, well, what's the quality of that and how do we deliver that safely? But I think we have to look at that also in the context of where we have market failure. And that particularly for me is in this area of affordable housing. Savills recently produced a cautious assessment post-COVID-19 that said increased mortgage hurdles, falling stock markets impacting savings for deposits. They see a potential 40% reduction in transactions. So the existing housing market under huge strain, that the risk of that being that you could have a pullback in terms of delivery of builds. So it'd be reasonable to expect for the sales market to contract as it has during past post-recessionary recoveries. Now, Mark Farmer and Mike Diath recently produced a report called Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation, a housing blueprint for an industrial a blueprint for a housing-led industrial strategy. And I think that's I'd really recommend you to dig that out and have a read of that if you're interested. I think it's a really interesting proposition. And in that paper, they say this: existing return on capital delivery models that dominate the market will not support increased building unless developers' exit risk is addressed. Irrespective of what discounting, planning breaks, or other incentives are implemented to pump prime activity, simply put, developers will not build out projects unless there is an end client, and whether it be a domestic purchaser, a housing association, a local authority, or indeed the government. So there's a pressure here around the market as it moves, as it responds to COVID, and of course also around the existing market failure, that even if it can respond, what's the presumption about how we deliver more of the affordable that we desperately need. And the final thing I want to say then is cost pressures, market diversification, grant support, market failure, but also this need for innovation. And it was interesting that Nesta recently, which is a sort of think tank, essentially put out a really interesting report called Innovation After Lockdown. And in that, and it's the same sort of recommendation that you'll see in the Mark Farmer and Mike Diath report, there's a lot of talk about the need for regional and local centres of excellence to embed and sort of become R&D engagement for delivering innovation. And in the Mark Farmer report, they say this: we believe there's a unique opportunity to bring SME trade contractors and suppliers into the modular MMC market by establishing new consolidation centres. And these centralised but regionally located centres could be permanent or temporary, but would bring together traditional parts of the supply chain. And by co-locating a range of part traditional, part manufacturing techniques, the barriers to industrialisation for SMEs can be addressed. So there's a sense here of MMC not just being about these mega factories, but how do you really mature that supply chain and bring that local social value? And Nesta actually in their report said something quite similar to me, obviously looking at a broader area of innovation, but they said that one of their recommendations was to use test beds, both to stimulate innovation, the foundational economy. Foundational in this context would include, I think, housing, because of course it's such a key part of how our economy operates, and to increase the supply of innovations developed at the frontier that are readily applicable to the foundational economy. For instance, the government could provide support for test beds into that economy, whereby they provide funding. But the idea would be driving the social value. So not just allowing innovation to happen in a vacuum, but really looking at what are the societal needs that we need. And of course, in housing, the quality, the sustainability is such an important part of that market matures. So how can we create these regional centres? So I just share that because I think it's important to recognise that the nation is really needing solutions to our housing crisis. And we've been very careful and would continually say that certainly this is not to demonise the existing market, because we need those house builders to be building, but it is to recognise that we need that diversification. And that I think, and I'm seeing that there is opportunity now for a real diversification, how MMC may be part of that solution. Now, one of the questions that we've been asked into that space, I think, about policy is by Matthew, and he talks a little bit, I think, with some criticism here of the local administration about a perception of how they might be closing down democratic discussion on housing issues, and how is one city really available for local people to join in. So the specific question is, how do we see redressing, in his language, the unfortunate recent history, and including the view of people who may not agree with the administration views? So I think what I'd say to that, I think it's an interesting question. It's not necessarily an experience that I personally share, but I can certainly agree with you that what is critical is that views are heard. And it's really important for us that we want to be positioning ourselves to be a voice for concerned communities, but also always within that view of, well, how do the local communities be heard, supported, engaged, but also how do we look at this as a broader city? Because the issue of agency is also important for those people who have no community. How do their voices get heard? So certainly our experience today at the One City as a vehicle to bring different voices into playing is, I believe, a positive opportunity, because the city is a complex organism. But Matthew, I'd be really happy to chat to you offline about this and see, well, how can we help to broker some of those conversations? But I think, it's probably looking at what some of those individual examples are that you're talking about, and I'd be really keen to do that and happy to pick up with you on that directly. So that's a bit of the policy, and what we'd value, I think, from this community is your thoughts about that that market failure, the challenge post-COVID-19 recovery, the grant funding, the government, the current planning debate, because we want to draw in that wisdom and experience and sort of reflect it back and see how we can learn how MMC may be a solution to that space. But what is clear, and I don't know that people would say this is contentious, I certainly don't think it is in my opinion, is that there is currently a market failure. And so the opportunity to innovate, but as innovation happens, to look at what are the values that undergird that innovation. So MMC, for example, can become a beautifully sustainable product that is really focused on enabling a supply chain for good quality homes that are also countering for our affordable needs. Or it could become a bit of a disaster driven by profit for institutions that are looking how to build homes more quickly and more cheaply. Now, that is not the current play that we're certainly engaging. We're really encouraged by the people in that sector. But how is it supported? How is it enabled to deliver to those values and not allow kind of the old system of profit first to rob that value? So there's an opportunity to bring the public sector, the private sector, the community groups and others to really embed those values and underpin it as that sector emerges. I think it's analogous a little bit to how there was a lot of talk about in the early days of Silicon Valley, how a lot of those early sort of the big brands that we know of, a lot of those companies had great values. They were there to sort of create community. They were there to improve communications. They had really, admirable values. But of course, one of the problems was to scale their digital business. What they saw was that private equity had to come in to enable them to scale. And of course, private equity does a job. It provides finance, but it wants that quick, maximized return. So how can we help? By bringing, this is about land. Housing has a different ecosystem because it's all about land. So how can the land come into play with those partners to ensure that the right values are delivered? And we see that as a benefit for the broader city and actually the longer term wisdom of that decision making. So there are some reflections from the policy and the planning context that we're facing, and please do contribute. Jessie, I think we're now going to go into a bit of a Q&A session for the last 10-15 minutes.
Absolutely. We have 9 minutes left, and we've got a couple of questions that we've got one more come through here, and then I've got a couple that have been sent in ahead of time. So from Lucy Fletcher, and do you please send through any other questions on the Q&A box just in the Zoom if you've got anything else you'd like to ask us. From Lucy Fletcher, how have both your ideas of home changed since founding the Bristol Housing Festival? I think this is a really, really interesting question. And I think for me, my idea of home is, I think I have become a lot more appreciative of what we do have within Bristol City, and particularly around the country. So I came to Bristol as a student and never left. I'm one of those statistics that everybody talks about. But I have grown up across the UK, and I've lived in lots of different cities across the UK, just sort of by nature of what my parents did when I was a child. But it has meant that even across the country and all those different places that I go back to visit family and friends and that kind of thing, I've been really struck actually since working in the Housing Festival, just how much so many people do for cities, for urban conurbations, for rural areas, how much goes on behind the scenes that I would never have been aware of before doing this. And I also think COVID-19 has shifted my understanding of home and what that means. I think community has taken on a whole new word for me, particularly in COVID. I think I live in a particular area of Bristol where actually everybody came out on the streets and everybody got to know each other, and the kind of community has really stepped up to support one another through this year, and that's really shifted again some of my understandings of what home is and what communities are. What about you, Jez?
Yeah, I think what's impacted me most, the more we get into this, is just how critical it is that we, how home is so integral to people's health and well-being, and how the insecurity of not having that is, life chances, education, job opportunities, health, mental health, everything goes negative. And of course, we're not just talking here about traditional homelessness. We're also talking about people's ability to have dignity, people who are sofa surfing, who can't have, extend or receive hospitality, people living in emergency accommodation. There's a real human cost to this. And I think in that sense, what's impacting me about home is how it's just so foundational for people to have that sense of being able to thrive and the dignity of it. So it's one of the problems I think we need to address and engage with is that so often when we talk in the sort of the conceptual phase of housing, we're looking at sort of perfection often, or what's the best of the world. And I think one of the things we need to be very good at is really recognizing progress, because if you currently have no secure accommodation, one of the problems is that you feel quite resentful of the planning process that's stopping you have an opportunity, and yet that we need the wisdom of recognizing we also can't be building poor quality homes and homes that aren't be fit for the future. I'll just share you one little story about the very first expo. Was that it's not a lovely story, but I think it's important as an illustration. On I think day 4, we had a slightly messy protest. Someone had thrown at one of the homes some feces, human feces. And we were all pretty shocked at such a gross and decent assault, really. And obviously it all got cleaned up and put away. But actually, the more I thought about it, the more I was sympathetic, because, of course, for a lot of people who are on the housing waiting list or are living in insecure accommodation or are actually homeless, it must be galling to see the fact that you can pop up effectively overnight 6 homes. And yet, they may have been on a waiting list for 4 or 5 years. And so the sort of the level of anger or disengagement or, that people are feeling around their inability to sort of partake in the wealth of the city, I think is very real. So for me, I think that just the more you get into housing, the more you realize that it is this human story. And I think we need to be better at really engaging in and thinking about and being empathetic about people's needs and how people thrive. So that's certainly what I've been learning and I'm very sympathetic towards. So thank you for your question.
We have a question here from Henry Clark. Undoubtedly, there will be some extraordinarily important and valuable ideas, innovations and suggestions arising from the festival. How will you ensure that these are channeled through effectively to government? And do you think that they are ready to listen and act?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I think we're encouraged. So certainly we are, obviously, we started to work locally. So the politics of place in a city. What I think struck us was that when national government makes announcements or policy or provides funding, very often there is a policy gap or a funding gap, i.e. the money doesn't get spent because there isn't the ability through local authorities to draw it down, or there's a disconnection between what government wants to happen nationally and what local authority priorities are. So we focus, I suppose we're trying to reverse engineer this. What would it look like first to work in a place, a city, and to start to create real story, real innovation, and real kind of scalable solutions. We're also working with the combined authority, with WECA, who have been a real supporter of this. So now looking at, okay, well, if you've got the sort of things happening in the city, how can we start to share that regionally? How can we create that local, I suppose, ecosystem, even a centre of excellence around how these things are done, working and sharing with different local authorities and aggregating land into those solutions. And yes, now starting to talk to national governments. So certainly there is now, I think, scale. It was great to see with that Mark Farmer report, and Mark Farmer is obviously the government's champion for MMC, that Bristol and the West of England were recognised in that report as leading in some of this area. And I think that those conversations, the more that is happening on the ground, the more that there is real learning, the more there is opportunity to, I think, speak with, engage, and influence, I suppose, how national government thinks. But we kind of need to walk before we're running on that, and I think have some humility about we are at the beginning of this journey. Having said that, I think that, again, we're putting a webinar on about social value. Bristol has gone out quite significantly and really thought about the wisdom of procurement and how we build, not just looking at the price of things, but looking at the longer term value of things. So this conversation that's happening nationally around social value is something that, again, is happening in Bristol, and how can we create the case studies to share back with national government. So yes, it's a great challenge. We are a small team, but the more that people join in on this journey, because the idea is this is the housing festival, it belongs to the city, not to us. I think the more that we can showcase and create some of that connection to national government. And just one other question I've got here, is the housing festival specifically aligned to the Labour administration? Is this a political movement? In one sense, it's aligned to the administration simply because they are the administration, and we are keen to see real homes built. And I think it would be wrong to not give credit to to Marvin and the Labour administration in that context, because they've taken the leadership position on this. We talked about it being launched back in 2018. You know, it's as we said, it's easy to have ideas, but it takes real courage to go first. And you know, it's really important to recognise that there has been a risk in going first. And you know, ZPOD's being an example where lots of people would have said, well, that's a great idea. Who's done it before? And of course, when the answer is no one, it's more difficult, because you've got to go first, and why would you take that risk? So we're very you know, working very closely with HRA and the council, and that's both on the political side, but it's also with the broader officer side, who are also now really engaged, and we're trying to work with them. But it would be wrong to say that we're a political movement, because we want to work across cross-party. So we're working with WECON, obviously with Tim Bowles, Lord Way we've worked with, and he's a Tory peer. We're keen to work with every administration and every colour, because the housing crisis is not political in colour. It affects every part of the nation, and therefore comes under every political sort of influence. And I think in that sense, we need more collaboration. And certainly it's been great talking to Thang and Debonair recently, and others, because the truth is we need more of that collaboration to come around good ideas. And I don't believe, for me, that that's about a political movement. And one of the problems with political movements, of course, is that it means that after 5 years you may be needing to be re-elected, but we need the ability to think longer term. So we're keen to work with the administration and admire them, and are grateful for the opportunity, and we will continue to do so. But certainly we'll also work with other people of all colours.
Thank you so much. That is us done. So it is 11:30. We're going to call that close. Thank you so much for joining us. Do get involved with the rest of the Bristol Housing Festival over these 3 weeks. Engage with us on social media. Do join any of the other webinars that you'd like to. But thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we will see you again soon. Cheers.
Thanks very much. Great. See you soon.